All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. Um, so we're gonna allow people to get logged in. For those people that are watching it offline, you may want to fast forward like 5 or 10 minutes. We're going to start collecting questions, and then we'll go ahead and get started. If you have questions, you can enter them in the comments field. We could also, we usually have people that are kind enough to do kind of a running history of the meeting. So we'll make sure that we have that. So if anyone wants to volunteer to do that, we usually have some people that kind of do an index of the topics covered. You can also feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field. We have some questions that people had sent in, and we'll go ahead and get some people logged in and start asking some questions. So in the future, if you want, you could always send topics you want covered to Club Cubase at steinberg.net as an email address, and then we could go from there and start getting some different questions asked, and so we can prepare if necessary. So if you have any questions, you could enter them in the live comments field. If not, we will go ahead and get started pretty soon, but please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and then we could go ahead and get started. I'm going to go do a quick test and make sure that audio is playing. All right. All right. So we just had people getting logged in, asking some questions. All right. So we'll go ahead and have some people uh, have some questions. So we have people logging in. This usually takes a couple minutes. So again, if you're watching offline, you may want to fast forward to 5 or 10 or 5 minutes or so. It usually takes some time for people to get logged in and start asking questions. And if you're watching live, please feel free to go ahead and ask some questions in the comments field of topics you want covered. Okay, so we have some questions coming in. I'm just going to start entering these in my text document. Okay, so we have some questions coming in. All right, making some notes of topics coming in. Good to see people from all over the world. Okay, so the topics coming in. I'm just kind of copying these in. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Okay, you'll see we have some more questions coming in. If not, we'll go ahead and get started here in just a couple minutes. And I just want to check, make sure that the audio sounds, the voice sounds okay for people out there. If you just let me know, I'll play a little bit of the music and we'll see how that's sounding. So we'll just do that as a quick test. We've had some audio problems with on Windows 10 with Google Hangouts. So I just want to make sure. I'm not really, because it's delayed from when I'm presenting. It's hard. I don't really monitor the audio, but I just wanted to make sure if there's issues, just let me know and bring it up in the text. I apologize for all the weird audio stuff that's happened before. It ends up, after doing a lot of weird tests, that it was the Google Hangouts on Windows 10. So when I switched from Windows 7 to Windows 10, it started causing all sorts of fun issues. So, which is one of the last things I thought to look for, but after doing a lot of research, so I'm going to be doing it on my Mac. But we'll get an idea here. I'm just copying some more questions. We'll get started here in a minute. Okay, we'll wait just one more minute and then get started. See if there's any quick questions that are coming in. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so question is, can we use this scoring feature to add lyrics? So yeah, let me just open up a quick project here. Um, just go to a quick project here that has some MIDI information. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll activate this project. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. Okay, so to add lyrics into a score, let's say if I have my piano part. And if I wanted to, I could actually just kind of select the score editor, and you could double click and see it in the lower zone here if you wanted to. But sometimes when doing scoring, it may make more sense to actually just get to your scores menu and choose to open selection. So if we go to open score editor here, we can now see kind of an independent floating window that is our dedicated score editor. Now, there's two different views within the score editor. So what you want to do is to actually, one of them would be kind of like an edit view. The one that I like to look at is page view. And this actually kind of shows you exactly what a printed page looks like and what it's going to actually be when you print out the score. So it gives you kind of a really good indication. Now, if you wanted to add lyrics, what you want to do is to go to your tools on the left-hand side here, and there's a other tools. And here you see, we could just go to lyrics. And at this point, you could actually just start typing in the lyric, and you could hit the tab key, and that will just take you. Lyrics are in Greek. Kidding. Anyway, so just kind of enter in some text. And now if we chose to move a single note around, and one of the great things that you have in the score editor Cubase is you could actually just kind of graphically move different elements visually around. So if I wanted to take this note here and move that particular note, that lyric will automatically be tied with the particular lyric. So at that point, you could just simply have the lyrics associated with the notes. So to do it, just go select the part. You could actually go to the score editor, go to open score editor, go to page mode. And then at that point, under the symbols on the left-hand side for the editor, under other, we could see lyrics. And then just simply, once that tool is enabled, you can now just simply, with the cursor tool, we'll say, okay, let's get to lyrics. Select where you want to start entering in, type in, and then hit tab to navigate to different areas of the score. So I think you'll find it pretty fast and easy to kind of work putting in the lyrics that way. All right, we got some more questions come in. I'm just going to go and copy those over to my text document, and we'll continue on. Give me just a second for some housekeeping. Okay, so we had a question. Can we mute a track in portions so that it turns on and off? Yeah, there's a couple of ways of doing this. One is just by doing some mute automation. Hang on one second. I think I accidentally closed my Cubase. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Hit the wrong button here. All right. So sorry about that. All right. So if you wanted to mute a particular part on different sections of a song, there's actually just a dedicated mute tool. So if you wanted to come here and let's say if I wanted to cut a particular section here, And then you could actually just grab the mute tool and just simply, you'll see the mute tool has an X right there. And then you could just simply mute different portions of your song. So if I wanted to even also just grab my range selection tool, and then I think under the range, you could actually just say you wanted to split that part of the audio and then grab the mute tool. You could now just simply come there and just choose to mute just portions within the project window. So if you wanted to see different parts of the window kind of pop open, or just to see what part is visually muted, you could also just do mute automation as well within the project. So that way you're able to mute parts graphically within the main project window. And of course, if you wanted to unmute, you could just simply click on it again with the mute tool. And that way you could choose to mute or unmute different parts. So see if that makes sense for your workflow. If not, you could try automation as well. So let me know if that works for you. And we'll go on to the next question. We have some more questions coming in. I'm just going to copy them down. Okay, so we had a question. How many sounds are there in Halion Sonic SE? I think there's a couple thousand. Let me see if I can figure it out here really quickly. So let's say if we go to instruments, I'll just go ahead and I'll just go to my VST instrument rack. So one of the questions that we had was, can I see other third-party instruments in the media bay currently? So you can see it in the media bay, but this kind of graphic window here will kind of show the Steinberg instruments only at this point. So I'm not sure if there's plans on this being kind of added, but I'll pass on that feedback again, that people would like to see third-party instruments covered here. But if you do go to the media bay, you can have access to all of your different instruments directly from here. So anything that's a VST3 instrument, but it doesn't show up graphically here, is probably what I assume that you wanted to do. So let's go ahead and just open up one of my VST instruments here. I think we have a Halion Sonic SE already open in this particular project. And let's see, when I come here, and I may have other sounds that are loaded up here. Let me just see if I could see a quick number. I know there's several thousand presets in the Halion Sonic SE, and I could probably go to the website and figure it out. But let me see if I could actually just choose to do it from Media Bay. So let's say I just wanted to go to my plugin presets. Let's see if we can see a number here. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how many, but I want to say there's about 3,000 different sounds in total, but I could be mistaken. But I think it's actually on the Steinberg website as well, in the amount of sounds. And I have some additional sound packs that are in there, so that might, what I can see, might not have what is in the base version. All right, so let's go on to the next question. We have some more that have come in. Okay, I'm just copying over some questions that are coming in. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I see a question. How can I get the e-licenser to work? I sent an email last Friday, but so far no reply. I had to reinstall Windows 10. Um, Generally, it's going to be handled through your My Steinberg account, and there is a way to kind of if you're working with a USB e-licenser. At that point, you don't need a new e-license, but probably from what you're asking, maybe you have like a Cubase LE or AI or Elements, something that can run off of the soft e-licenser. So if you do, get a new hard drive or updated your Windows 10, if you go to your My Steinberg account, you could actually see kind of a reactivation under, I believe it's My Licenses. So you could do it directly from there without having to fill out a support request form. So give that a try if you haven't done that. If not, you could send me an email at Greg Ondo, or you can send an email to ClubCubase at Steinberg.net, and I could follow through with our support department as well if needed. But just check your My Steinberg account, and I think that'll do the trick. We had a question on how can we deactivate the lower zone editor? And sometimes when something new comes out, it could be a little problematic for some people. There's a couple of ways you could do it by default. So if you wanted to, you actually could go directly here on the top, and you could actually, in the upper right hand corner, you see these little icons, and that could just simply turn off the lower zone editor. So some of the key commands that were introduced, if you hit like Alt Control L, that will hide the inspector. So one of the new kind of zone concepts is it's kind of broken down the project window into 4 different zones. So I could have my zone here for my inspector and visibility, my lower zone, my project window zone, and kind of my media zone. So to turn any of these on or off is just Alt Control L, or Command Alt L for the inspector, Alt Control or Command Alt E for the lower inspector. On the right hand side, that could be turned off with Alt Control or Command Alt R. And then the transport is the same, Alt Control or Command Alt T. So if you don't want the lower zone, just simply hit Alt Control E, and then you could kind of configure it exactly how you want, or you could just turn it on and off directly right here in the upper right hand corner handle. So that way, if you wanted more visibility for your different tracks, it's no problem. You could just simply kind of customize it exactly how you want. Even though by default it may turn on, you could just simply turn it off very quickly. All right, so you see something. Can I use the chord track to make example a piano rhythm? Okay, so let's go through this question here. Let me just open up project here, which I had open before I closed the program accidentally. Sorry about that. So let me just come here. I think I have a project that will do this for us. All right, so this is one of the cool things that you could do directly. Let me just see if I have a. Okay, so I'm just going to go here to one called. I don't think I'm kind of doing my demos on a different computer than I usually do, so I don't have every single one of my projects, but I think I can. Okay, I think this will work. Okay, so one of the hidden things that you could do in the chord pads that's kind of very interesting and cool is the ability to kind of not only trigger different chord pads. So I'm going to turn on my editor screen again. I could do this by Alt Control or Command Alt E, and then we could switch it to our chord pads directly here. So what I want to do is we're going to set my connections here one more time so you guys can hear. Give me 1 second. Sorry about this. Okay, so if I wanted to take, my different chord parts here, and let me just make sure I have my connections correct. Okay. So if we have our chords, what you could do is actually from the chord pad setup here is you could just choose to have it be plain chords, or you could have different patterns. So at this point, you could actually just say, okay, I want it to have, in these patterns, you could actually just kind of take a number of different, so you could actually have, if you wanted to choose piano players, and then you could actually just take different, if you wanted to be playing chords or if you wanted to do different piano patterns. So if you have a piano part here, let's say, I want to take this particular pattern from the part, all you'd have to do is just simply kind of cut a particular part here, let's say from a piano, and you could get like, different MIDI files if you wanted to. But at this point, you could now go to, let's say, your chord pads, and you could just drag and drop a particular pattern directly on to the chord pad, to the patterns here. So this way I could just say, okay, I want to take the pattern chords, and I could import a MIDI file, or you could actually just kind of drag and drop again. I think if I just come here, we could just drop a MIDI part. And now as you would play back the chords, at that point, it would play back the patterns here. So if you wanted to have like different guitar libraries or piano libraries, then as soon as you actually trigger the chord pattern here, probably not the most exciting part. Let me just grab another part. But that would be all that you would have to do to just simply drag and drop. So once you go into the chord patterns, click on the chord pads, click on edit, and then you could see you want to change it to patterns instead of playing chords here. And then you could actually just choose the pattern and import a MIDI file, or just have it directly from a part and then drag and drop that in. And then when you trigger the chord, it could actually just trigger that particular pattern for you. So if you're not a keyboard player or don't play like cool clavinet parts, you could just kind of drag in any MIDI data and then trigger it with the chord pads to make it work. All right, let's go through some more questions are coming in. Okay, so question is probably going back to the sample editor here. So when you double click on a MIDI part, let's say if I don't have this turned on, when I double click a MIDI part, it's going to automatically go directly here to the lower zone. And if you wanted, the question was you wanted to go to a secondary screen. And then this could be just simply turned on as a preference. So if we go to preferences and then under editors, we could just come right here. And then you could just choose to, when you double click on an editor in the lower zone, so double click opens the editor in a separate window, or double click opens the editor in the lower zone. So right now our behavior is when I double click on a part, it goes to the lower zone. Now, when I go to my preferences and I change this preference, and again, it's under preferences, and you'll see editors. So you can now just change this to opens in a window when you double click. And now when you double click, it's going to go into a separate window, and that will retain its window placement like previous versions. So once again, if you want, and you could have different behavior if you double click versus use a versus using a key command. So you could have the key command will open it in the lower zone, and double click will open it in an independent window, or vice versa. So once again, just if you go to your preferences on the PC, on Windows, it's going to be under your file menu, and the Mac under Cubase menu. Go to editors, and now you could just simply choose how the preferences behave for double clicking or initiating from a key command. So that way it could go directly onto secondary screen, whatever you want it to be. So I'll go ahead and change it back to my behavior here. So it goes into the lower zone. So I think that will help you with and making that make a little more sense for you. All right, going back, reading through some questions that are coming in. Okay, so the question is, will Cubase 9 import video clips? You wanted to kind of augment a Christmas video. So yes, all the versions of Cubase will import video. Currently, you may need to install QuickTime, especially on the PC platform, to get that to work, but you could just simply go to import video file. So one of the things that Steinberg is working on and should be released pretty soon is kind of a video engine that's not reliant upon QuickTime. So the video engine will actually should be coming pretty soon, I believe this spring. So at that point, but you can just simply import the video currently. But if you're a Windows user, you may want to go ahead and download Apple's QuickTime for it to work, and then you could add your music and see the video directly on the project window and a video track as well. So we have a question: is it possible to watch the YouTube video afterwards for streaming? Yes, it will be available offline. I saw one comment that the video quality wasn't as good. Sometimes refreshing your browser can make a difference. Usually when that is happening, it's just because of the internet connection on the person viewing the video, but it's actually kind of transmitted at a 720p resolution. So if the video is not looking so great, it will be available offline, but sometimes refreshing the browser can make a big difference. So let's go on to some of the other questions. So getting back, there's a kind of a follow-up question to the QuickTime. So it's not supported by Apple, but you can still find it online. So it will, the last version of QuickTime will work in Windows 10. I use it every day. So you can just find a download link and install it, and it'll function. And we should see the new video engine coming soon. So. So I'm seeing a question: is it possible to color the entire channel strip, like some other programs? Currently, it's going to be just kind of the video colors that are indicated here on the bottom, and then we have different fader colors for different types of tracks that could be user defined. Okay, so we had a question. Let me just go through some of the questions, when we'll circle back here just a little bit. So I'm seeing a question. Let me just move the microphone here for a second. Uh, any chance to bring back old style color preferences with sliders? There was up to Cubase 7. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. But if you go to the color tool here, there's you could change the colors and then kind of go to the color palette. So if you wanted to, um, so if you come here, you could have some different options. So say we wanted to append a new color, and then once you're here, you can just simply kind of add different colors. There's also different levels of intensity. So I'm not sure if that was different in version 7. It might have been, but see, sometimes people miss that. Um, Okay, so we had a question on comping vocals. So let's take a quick look. So yeah, there's a lot of great tools in Cubase for comping. So when I come here, let's just let me open up a different project. I'll close this. Let me just see if I have a comping demo. Okay, I'll just create a quick comping demo here. We'll just do it with a new project. I won't actually record audio, but I'll just kind of create an empty project here. Okay, so I'm just going to add an audio track. And we'll make this kind of really big and obvious. And I'll just do a quick cycle recording here. So let's do just a couple of bars. And I'm just going to drag this over here. So let's say I will just do 4 bars. And then what do we want to do is to just make sure that we have our cycle mode kind of turned on. Let me just adjust this up here. So if we have our cycle mode turned on, and then I want to record a couple times. Now, one other way of activating the cycle mode is one of the things that changed in previous versions that sometimes people get confused on is, one, if you go up to the top here, you could actually just simply kind of zoom in and out when it turns into like a compass. But if you go a little higher, you could actually turn on and off comping. So let's say if I was comping a vocal or a guitar solo, something like that, at this point, I could just come over here. Let's just hit record, and we'll do a couple imaginary bars here and do a couple different takes. So now we're going to do take 2, take 3, etc. We'll go ahead and do a couple of these. We'll do say this will be our last pass. And now what we want to do is create a comped vocal of all those different parts. So now I do this, and what we can do is actually click on this little icon here that says show lanes. And these are all within one track. And what we see is we have one active part and one part that is muted. So if I wanted to come here, there's actually a dedicated comp tool, which looks like a little hand. So I could pick the particular take, and let's say I'll just go ahead and color these particular parts so I can see like which one is actually active, and that will kind of get, you know, some programs call promotion to the top. But if I wanted to, so a lot of people will go through and use a scissors tool and kind of just do different comps. But what I could do is actually with the comp tool, I could actually just select different regions of different parts directly here. And so all you have to do is with the comp tool, just kind of hold the mouse down and drag over. And then at that point, if you wanted to, and there's different key modifiers. So if you hold down like the Alt or Command key, you could play back each of the individual parts to audition, select them. So this way it makes it very easy to kind of create your comp parts. So if you have multiple parts, let's say for a vocal, just simply expose the lanes, and they don't have to be recorded in cycle mode. They could just be recorded on top of each other with the different tracks. And then at that point, go to the comping tool, and then you could just simply select what regions of what takes that you want, and it will automatically mute and unmute the other takes so that it will kind of make sense. And then if you don't want to see that, just simply come right over there and you can hide and show or expose those different parts there by activating the lanes on or off for the particular part. All right, just going back through some of your questions or cycling in. Thanks for all the great comments from people and all the great questions. Okay, I'll pass on. I see a couple people wanting the full channel to be colored, so I'll pass that on as feedback. So I see that the reactivation for the e-licenser was successful. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, so I see a question on, can I explain the intelligent quantization? So I think this is probably referred to the iterative quantization. So what an iterative quantization is, let me see if I could actually just kind of draw some, I'll create a MIDI track here, and we'll just go ahead and draw some events in. So I'm going to create just a blank part here. All right. So with an iterative quantization, so let's say if I draw, and I'm just going to turn off my snap value here. Just draw in some chords here real quick. So let's say we're a little ahead. All right. So if I wanted to quantize these particular values, I could have my iterative quantization activated. So, and what that's going to allow you to do is to just simply, so if I hit Q now, what the iterative quantization will do, and you could actually see this in the quantize setup. I think it's under the edit menu, or you could actually Just kind of, let me see if it's up here as well. All right. So what the iterative quantization will allow you to do is to kind of set a percentage of the value here. So if we turn on our iterative mode, you see a percentage note. And what that's going to allow you to do is to just simply, let's say a note is a little bit ahead of the beat here. It's going to allow you to have a certain percentage where 100% would be the beat. But what an iterative quantize would allow you to do is to move it 80% closer to the beat. So this way it's not so rigid feeling. So let me see if I have the iterative quantize on. You see that when I did that, and we'll just undo this, and I'll zoom in a little more. So right here is the downbeat. And then when I have iterative quantize set to 80% and I quantize, it moves it 80% closer to the beat. And if I do it again, it kind of takes that distance and moves it 80% closer, 80% closer, 80% closer. Whereas if I don't have the iterative quantize enabled, and if I come here and turn this off without the percentage based functionality, it would go directly to the beat. So it allows you to kind of have a varying percentage for the quantization value. So again, it's not, I think that's what you're referring to with the IQ or the intelligent quantize, as was asked in the question. But at this point, it's the iterative quantize is what I think you're referring to. So it allows you to kind of move closer to the beat by percentages as opposed to being strictly dead on the beat. All right, go back, look at some of the questions that are coming in. All right. So, question is, how is it fast to add an audio track? So, if I select here, I think it kind of depends on what the currently selected track is. But if you just double click in the area, so let's say if I have a MIDI track selected and double click, it'll add a MIDI track. If I have an audio track, I could just double click here and add the audio track. You could also set up a key command or a macro to add track audio or add mono track, I think is in the key commands, or add stereo track that you could trigger from a key command itself. So, but if you have a MIDI track selected, you double click in the track zone, it'll add in our MIDI track. If you have an audio track selected, it'll add in our audio track. So I think that's probably pretty fast. And you can also add multiple tracks simultaneously when you do that. So we have a question that the customer has Halion 3 and Halion 6. Can you load all the sounds in? Yes, all those sounds are compatible from Halion 3 to Halion 6. So right, some more questions coming in. Okay, so we have a question on how can I A/B tracks. So it's a great question, and there's a clever way we could do this, kind of using the control room. So let me just show you how we could do that. So we'll go back to this project, and we had some mono audio going on before. So let me just see if this will play back in stereo here. We get this question a lot if you want to do like reference files as a mix. So let me just see if we're. Okay, so in here, I think we actually, what I want to do is first we're going to go to our VST connections. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go to my VST connections, and we're going to activate first off, the control room. And so we do that by turning on this little icon here. And this will kind of, make a lot of sense overall. If you're not using the control room, it's highly recommended to do it because it gives you a lot of great functionality. In here, we could have something called a cue mix. And these are often used for headphone mixes for artists as they're tracking or recording. So I'm going to just set up a quick cue mix here. Okay. And okay, so within this project here, there's actually, so let's say I go to my mix console, and then let's say I have some effects like inserts on my tracks here. So let's say I wanted to run just like my master. I want to run the new, let's say our new maximizer. So I'll just kind of come here. And let's say our frequency EQ. So I kind of come here. Let's turn on to our more contemporary algorithm here. So if we bypass it, you can hear kind of pretty significant difference in the audio. But let's say maybe we wanted to have a reference track. And I believe that in this project that there is a 24-bit master here. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this particular track. And you can see that it's muted. Now, a lot of times what happens when people are trying to do a comparison and they have effects on the master section, sometimes you're playing back a mastered track through the actual you're playing a master track back through a master section and has kind of dynamics processing, and then it doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and we could call these kind of these sends kind of anything. So I'm going to turn on my send here. So now, and I'm going to turn off the routing on the particular channel. So let's say if I just wanted to, I'll just go really quickly to my full mixer view here. So let's just say we'll hit F3 and we go to our large mixer view. Maximize that. So we go to our selected channel, and in the routing, I just wanted to send it to no bus. Okay. So now we can go to our control room mixer. And so as we kind of play this back, what I want to do is go to the control room mixer, and you could actually have this as part of the mixer or kind of a dedicated control room here. So at this point, we could see kind of our Q1 here. And then what we're able to do is you could actually now, let's see if I've set this up correctly. At this point, I could listen to everything that's going here. So now when I go to Q1, I'm only hearing this track that's been routed to Q Mix 1. And when I go back to my main mix, I'll just make it like a really obvious EQ difference here on my master bus, so we can hear it. So let's say I just did like an obnoxious EQ. We'll go back to my control room. So this is my reference track. So as soon as I wanted to go here, I could now just go to my control room mixer. So there's my reference that's not going through any of the master effects. And this is my mix that's going through. So that way I could take the one file separately, and you could just kind of A/B it directly in the control room. And that way you could take like another reference mix and compare it to yours without running through all the master effect processing. So just simply, again, come to your devices, to VST connections, and then you want to set up your Q mix, and you really don't even have to route it anywhere. And at that point, what you're able to do is go into the channel in question. You want to send it to no target, but turn on the send level. And from the control room mixer, and again, you could have this activated directly from the dedicated control room mixer. You could listen to that bus, or you could listen to what your mix is with all the effects processing for quick, easy comparison between the two. So I hope that helps. Give that a try, and I think that will do the trick for you. Okay, so I'm just reading through some of the questions. Okay, so we had a question about using the UR44 with external effects, and I don't have my UR44 installed today, but we'll go through this process. So one of the great things with Cubase is using the ability to use external effects, and and instead of having it integrated with a mixer, which is not very DAW-like in a lot of ways. We wanted to incorporate it using the available inputs and outputs of your audio interface. And kind of use your audio interface as a mixer that could be controlled and accessed from your software mixer. So if I go to my devices menu, and again, we go to VST connections, you may go to your outputs, and here you could probably add outputs here, and it'll, since the UR44, I think, has 4 stereo outs and a monitor out, but you would see different outputs listed here. You don't actually want to define your outputs here, but within the VST connections, what you want to do is set up an external effects. So let's say I was going out to like an 1176. I could just come over here, type in 1176, and I want it to be a mono in, mono out. Then at that point, what you want to do is to set your inputs and outputs directly here. So don't set it in the inputs and outputs. Don't define it here. You could just leave this as your monitoring source. But when you go to your external effects, at this point, set your input and your output. And define where the hardware is physically connected with a cable. It could be digital connection, depending on the device, or an analog, XLR, RCA, quarter-inch device. So at that point, define your connections here. So now when you go to access that as an external effect, so let's say if I wanted to come here to my inserts, at this point I would see external effects plugins, and now my 1176 can come up. And what this will do is, between the signal for my maximizer, it would then go out to my hardware 1176 and then directly into, let's say, this plugin here. So at this point, you could integrate this within the signal flow, and even in between different effects processors and software. Now, when the signal is sent out like this, the one thing to be aware of, depending on the latency of your audio interface, excuse me, and sometimes the latency of the hardware device, like a lot of early digital reverbs have, a pretty significant amount of latency sometimes within their actual converters, is this little button. It's a bit hidden and subdued, but what you want to do is to actually just click there, and what you'll hear, a little kind of sound, and what that's doing is that's actually measuring the latency of that path that's been created for the audio, and that will automatically compensate for the delays that are imposed by all the hardware and the signal chain. so that it'll play back perfectly in time for you. So at that point, you can just simply just have that automatically routed out to the real world. So again, go to your VST connections and you could access it by hitting F4. But if you come right here, you could just say, let's come here, and don't define it as the outputs or inputs. Just simply define those as your external effects, and then you'll be able to access it just like you would in a very flexible system. So I have friends that have 60 pieces of outboard gear that are constantly defined in their setups. So some of my friends have the best outboard gear collections in the world. Just simply have everything defined as their own external plugins within inside of their Cubase or Nuendo setups, so they can have access to it all anywhere they want in combination with the software. So try doing that, and that works the same way for UR44 or works the same way for any audio interface with multiple ins or outs. So if that makes sense, just let me know in the comments and we'll go ahead and move on. Right, so I'm seeing a question, and maybe the question could be reiterated about exporting multiple MIDI files to different places. Um, just read it here. All right, is it possible to export multiple MIDI files at different places, not the batch export, but files in different places? So you could, there's no way to export it to that I know of, like to multiple file destinations at one time. So generally the MIDI files are going to do it at once. If you wanted to have different places, excuse me, different places on the timeline, whatever the selected values are, those will be preserved, but there isn't a way to kind of send it to different file formats or to do multiple MIDI files at once currently. Um, so I hope that makes sense, and that if I didn't answer your question, please feel free to kind of ask it again. All right, so we have a question on recording multi-track drums and quantizing. Let me just reread the question. Okay, what does a slice help for in kind of doing this? So let me just open up a project here. Thanks everyone for the great questions. I know we have some more that we'll circle back for. All right, so let's take a quick look at this setup here. And let me just set my connections here. I may have my control room still switched over to something that's not defined. Hate when it's my fault. All right, so let's say if I wanted to take all right, so let's say I just have like a multi-track drum, kind of like this. So let's say I want to do the thing that every drummer hates doing. So let's say we just wanted to take all of our drums. We could solo our drum folder here and just play it with a click. And we listen to it. So we can hear some push and pull. So you hear like the drummer sped up, and so how do we quantize drums to make it a little more effective? So one of the things that we could do is actually what we want to do is to define and actually find some different hit points. So I'm going to come over here and we'll make this just a bit taller so we can see. And then I'm going to go to my hit points here. So we're going to just adjust kind of our threshold here. And we adjust the threshold so that as we kind of work on it, that we don't have tracks that are kind of bleeding through. And just to make it a little more obvious here, I'll just go ahead and open it up in the full editor. Okay, so we can come here and we just okay, so let's just go ahead and have it. So we can set our threshold here, and let's go ahead and do it for, let's say, our snare track. And again, we'll go to the editor. And as we do this, we can kind of see what we wanted to accomplish is to have our threshold here so that it doesn't include like every single track that's bleeding through. And in this case, like the hi-hat is, let's adjust our threshold here. So go to and often what you want to do is just kind of like a kick, snare, maybe hi-hat, depending on the part. Okay, I'll zoom in here just so we can see that. And let's find our hi-hat. So because drums will kind of bleed together, it's pretty typical that you're going to have tracks that are bleeding together in a live drum recording. So now what we want to do is to put all these into a group and enable something called group editing. So now these will all be kind of linked together. We'll see our quantize panel up here. And then we could actually kind of set different priorities. So let's say I want the kick to have the highest priority. And then we'll go to our snare. And then let's say our hi-hat. So what we want to do is now that when we do this, we're kind of setting the musical definitions of kind of where our beat should be aligned. So as we do this, we can now just come over here. And what we want to do is we kind of set the priorities of our kick, snare, and hi-hat. And now it's kind of placed visual markers that we can see based on those priorities. So I'm going to say slice. And now it's sliced each of those drum parts into thousands of different little slices. Now we could choose to do an audio warp, or we could just kind of come over here and we can say, I want to quantize this, and we can say to 16th notes. And now as we do that, it's now shifted each of those little slices. And what we could do is just a crossfade between all those slices. So if we wanted to listen to this in context, at that point, it's going to take all those different parts and just simply be able to kind of do multiple drum quantization between that to kind of tighten up the feel. So that's kind of how you could do kind of multi-track drums. So let's move on to some of the other questions. Okay, question is there some tricks for doing like 32-bit plugins still within Cubase? Um, so one of the things that we did is, a high number of kind of problems that people would run into at Cubase is kind of our support for legacy plugins, and some of these are going back to 1996. Some plugins because we still supported 32-bit and 64-bit plugins simultaneously. So with version 9, they decided to stop bridging 32-bit plugins internally, but it's still available through products like JBridge is a popular one. So if you go through JBridge, so if you come here, you could go to your plugin manager, and then it used to be kind of a secret XML file that was created. But now we could actually you could actually see it here called the blacklist folder. So you can see plugins, and the first time that you start Cubase, or usually it kind of also can pop up after seeing for some reason like a time change can cause it, where it'll go back and kind of rescan your plugins. And what it's actually doing is it's actually kind of testing the latency of the plugin and the compatibility of the plugin. And if it sees a plugin doesn't pass some certain kind of diagnostic tests, what it's actually doing is it'll blacklist. And generally, if it's blacklisted, it's a pretty good indication that plugin is going to cause some stability issues. But if you do have, and we know that people have 32-bit plugins, so what you can do is just simply activate it and run it via JBridge. And that would allow you to still use those plugins within your system. But it's and I realize that some plugin companies are out of business and aren't updating their plugins, but it's a pretty good time to, have 64-bit only plugins at this point. So that's a great consideration to get into. So, but if you still need it, just run JBridge and then go from the devices menu to the plugin manager. And then at that point, you can reactivate the plugins as you see them. All right, we'll move on to some other questions. Thanks to everyone for the great questions coming in. Okay, so a couple questions here. Is it possible to have the bus as a fader, indicating floating fader like Pro Tools? Thank you. So when you have, a bus, and sometimes you could see that as like an effects return channel, that does show up as a fader. Or if you add a VCA, it does show up as a fader. If you add a group, it does show up as faders in your project. So, and then you could just simply, I'm not sure if it's floating. I'm not familiar with that, but you can just simply, but they do show up as faders, and you could, have access to it. But maybe if you could reiterate, kind of explain what the floating fader is. I'm not familiar with the concept. Okay, so we have a question. I have 3 RME cards, 2 UAD Apollo. Is it possible to have all enable, or can I only choose one of them? Some of the cards, like some of the RME cards, you could run multiple instances of the same card under the same ASIO driver. So I know people that do that have like 3 MADI cards, and that's how you can get into having 60 pieces of outboard gear. But generally, you can't run different companies under the simultaneously. I don't know of any 2 companies that kind of work that way. Most of the time, it's going to be one system, especially on Windows. On a Mac, you can do something in the audio MIDI setup to set up an aggregate device, but that has some problems in that it compounds the latency. So you actually kind of have the latency of both interfaces instead of them working simultaneously. I've known people in kind of extreme situations will run through like ASIO for all, where you could have multiple audio interfaces selected, but it's still a little quirky. And especially like the clocking between the two audio interfaces is never really gets resolved. So by default, generally, if it's the same audio interface, sometimes you could run multiple interfaces like our Firewire interfaces that were out that I still run in my studio, the MR816, the Steinberg MR816. I run 3 of those interfaces and I can have all my ins and outs, but most interfaces don't have that option. So I would say generally not, but you have a chance of maybe running 2 Apollos together or the RME cards together, but probably not the RMEs and Apollos on the Windows platform. And you could explore the aggregate devices on Mac, but you may find it's not as what you anticipate. All right. So let me go through. I know we had some questions I'm going to circle back for. Hope everyone's learning a couple tips or tricks. All right. I'm just circling back. I know we have one on Audio Warp. We'll get to that. Let me just... All right. All right, so we see a question. I have 2 video monitors. How can I avoid the toolbar at the bottom of the screen to be stretched over, divided over both screens? Depending how you have your video monitors up, and I guess the toolbar, let me just reread it at the bottom. I assume that's maybe the transport bar within Cubase. So if you have like if you have like the project window on one screen and editors and the floating mix console on the other screen, I don't think that the toolbar will float over. There is kind of the Windows toolbar that could float in, and there's options to hide that when you right click on the toolbar. So if you have the project window spread across 2 screens, I haven't tried that on my studio system, but that may kind of spread that over. But if you kind of keep the project window to one screen and like a mixed console and editor screens on the secondary video screen, then I think you're okay. Okay. So we had a question on Groove Agent, how to use loops and have its transients spread them on individual pads so I can recreate new groove. Okay. And okay, so let's come over here and take a look at Groove Agent. Just a new project here. Let me see. I may have a Groove Agent project already done. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay, so let's say I have kind of generic sounding drum loop here. All right, and I wanted to take that directly over to a new instance of Groove Agent. So let's say, and we could do this with the SE version or directly with the full version. So first off, what I want to do is just click on my instrument, and we don't have any samples loaded up. So I'm going to just simply drag over the drum loop from the project window onto a pad. And now I could just trigger that pad, trigger that loop. So we see that it sounds the same. But what we want to do is, you'll notice that if you're on the instrument and go to the edit, one of the sub tabs here is slice. So I'm going to say create slices. And what it's done is it's basically broken down each of the transients here. And you could have it done by grid, transient, transient plus grid, or manually done. And now at this point, we could just, and what it's done is it's created a pattern. So I could play that pattern. And this pattern is actually set up of each of the individual slices. I have my kick, hi-hat, snare, hat, kick, snare. So it's broken down each of the rhythmically significant points by transient or by grid, or transient and grid, or manually. And now what I could do is, it's now created the pattern, and I could just drag this pattern directly to my project window. So I'll go ahead and we'll listen to this. And as I hit play, all right, so this is MIDI events that is triggering our individual MIDI notes that are in fact triggering the slices. So let's do something a little more creative with that. So let's say I want to duplicate that a couple times. So I'll come here. And we'll say one more time here. Okay, so now I'm just going to go and let's just make this, I'll just make this a little easier for you guys to see, everyone to see. All right, so now I have, this is my individual slices. I'm going to use just the arrow keys on my computer keyboard. Very scientifically, not random at all. And let's say I wanted to go to the next one. So I just randomly move those. And then I want to go here to functions. And then in the functions, we want to adjust. And let's say I just wanted to reverse the MIDI notes. So we're going to take our original drum loop and now have that played back the same. And let's do a variation. Now reversed. Turn the beat around. And back to the original drum loop. So it makes it a very easy way to actually kind of construct and deconstruct familiar loops and make them kind of a bit more your own, make it a little more personal, and be able to kind of tweak stuff, you know, but still kind of having natural variations, but the same groove, the same sound. So it's a very musical way of kind of working with loops using the Groove Agent SE that comes with Cubase. And with the full version of Groove Agent, you could actually kind of you could actually have different like the snares could all be grouped together by color. The kicks, so similar frequencies, can be grouped together. So if you want to take all the snares and replace it with the best snare of the bunch, you could do that as well. But still, even with the included Groove Agent SE4 with Cubase, a lot of great functionality for loops there. All right, going through some of our questions have cycled in. So you see a question: can I copy fader levels to sends? So we could do it for doing like cue mixes. It's not necessarily for sends. So with our control surfaces, some of the Yamaha control surfaces like Nuage allow you to flip the sends down to faders. So you can control that. But what you can do that's quite interesting is, let me just open up another project here. Just see if I can find this one project. I thought I had it in here. Okay, here it is. So we can't kind of copy them to not sends, but to cue mixes. So let's say if I come here and I wanted to, so we'll come over here and say, okay, let's just go to our control room mixer. First, let's set up some cue sends in my VST connections. So again, we go to our studio tab, and this is where we go to the control room. So let's add some cues. So let's say, okay, we're gonna have our bass, drums, guitars. So say guitar, and let's add, let's say bass, and let's add drums. We'll just rename Q1 here to Vox. So let's say I just wanted to now integrate my control room functionality here. So when I wanted to look at my cue mixes, and this is something that I missed for a long time, is we can see kind of our cue mixes laid out for us here. Then we could set these all individually, but a lot of times, let's say if we were setting up like a more me mix, what you'd want to do is to actually just kind of come here, we'll select this, and we can hold down the shift key, and let's say, okay, I just want to select all these channels here. But if you kind of right click up here, you could actually see all cues. And then what I could do is say, use the current mix levels, and we could apply that to all of our cue mixes. And then I'm able to kind of tweak. So if you wanted to create a more me headphone mix, you could do that. So you can kind of flip the faders to the cue sends, but not to traditional aux sends for effects. So I hope that was helpful. All right, so we see a question on a control room. How can I connect a subwoofer and separate the stereo and sub bandwidths in the control room? Generally, the control room is not going to do like crossovers. So if you create a, let me see if we get this set up here. Let's say if I go to my VST connections, and generally that's kind of handled within the speakers themselves. Just close that out. Sorry about that. So let's get to our VST connections. Yeah. So how it would work in a 5.1 setup is to actually, when you come here and we have a 5.1 out, there's going to be a dedicated LFE channel. But with your sub, since it's still a stereo signal, it's not kind of approached separately. But if I added an audio track here, um, let's say if I'm here and I add an audio track and I add a 5.1 audio track. So we come here and we add, instead of a stereo, a 5.1, or we'll just add, we'll say we'll add a mono track. Sorry, we'll just do this. And now I route this to the 5.1 output, that when I go to the panner here, right? So we'll come here. That at this point you'll see like your LFE channel that can be fed directly from the panner itself. But if you're in a 2.1, since it's not a dedicated channel, it really should be done kind of with the crossovers built into the subwoofers. I know some of the Yamaha subwoofers, I forget the model name, that come with that a lot of people use with like the HS5s or 7s, that they, on the subwoofer itself, and I have an old pair of NHTs that I use for my 5.1 monitoring, that those are set up to be kind of addressed, but not a stereo channel, since again, it is just 2 channels. So you can't really adjust and kind of shoot more to the sub. Some people will set it to 5.1. And, what you could do, I guess, if you really had to do it, is in your 5.1 setup, and let's say you're in the panner for your 5.1, you could set it up as 5.1. And then you have the options of, if you hold down, let's get the right modifier key. Give me just 1 second. Fine. But this way you could set it up as a 5.1 output if you really wanted to do it, and basically turn off the center, left, right, and then feed it through an LFE. But it's not going to really work on your mix down as you would expect. So you'd probably want to do it at your actual speaker with hardware crossover. That would be the ideal solution, because kind of sending it out, then it's not going to really be included in your audio mix down. But if you want to do it for your own enjoyment to get it thumping really good, you could open up the 5.1 and then just in each channel bypass the center and surround speakers, but not advisable. All right, going through some of your questions. Okay. Any ways to record the audio of a VST instrument in real time without rendering or exporting? Yes. So let's go back to a new project. And we'll just do an empty project. And let's say I want to start off with Groove Agent. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and load up just a kit here, and we'll just start a pattern. So say we have this playing. Okay, so Groove Agent can actually kind of output both MIDI and audio simultaneously. So let's say if I wanted to record the MIDI information in Groove Agent, I could just set it for the MIDI input here. Now, to record the audio in real time, and I know some people love to do this. If someone is, like they have a great piano player, keyboard player, and they're just like nailing parts, it's like, why record it as MIDI? Let's just record it as audio. But, MIDI gives you a lot more flexibility for fixing different patterns if necessary, or mistakes. So what you could do here is we could set up a bus channel. So we're going to set up a group. So I'm going to set up a group channel track. Okay, we'll make it stereo. Okay, so here's our group, and we'll just call this drum group. Okay, so we'll go to my Groove Agent. Then we can go to the audio characteristics here. And in like a send, I'm going to, and I could send this directly to my drum group if I wanted to, or I could do it through like an effects send as well. So I'm just going to change the output. Let's say I'll just do it through my stereo out here, just so we can monitor that. And now on my send, I'm going to send it to my drum group. Okay. This is kind of a little left-handed, but it'll make sense here in a second. So we have kind of our Groove Agent here. So when we play, we could hear that. Okay, so that's now being routed into our group. And then I wanted to create another audio track, and we'll make it a stereo audio track. And then its input, I want to set it to the drum group here. So now I'm going to place Groove Agent. Sorry, still open up my old transport bar. So let's say I just come here, and let's start from the beginning. I'll just hit record. And now at this point, it's recording both the audio, if everything is set up correctly. And I'm just... So if you set it to the group, you could then just record the audio. Let me just check my routing here real quick. I'll just take let me just check my routing one more time on the output of the instrument. All right, so I'm just going to check this. But that's the idea. I must have something set incorrectly. Apologize for that. But if you send it to a group and then take the input from the group, at that point, you route that to the input of the audio channel. It should work. Let me just try sending the Groove Agent directly out from here to my group channel. Just see if it's that. So there. So now you could actually record the MIDI information and the audio. I probably didn't have the send turned on. So that's how you could do it very easily. So if I go back here to where my Send was that it wasn't set up. But so if you make sure if you go through send it to send is turned on, but just route it to the output and then it's recording MIDI and audio simultaneously. So we had some people asking about like they have an older sound card. Let me just move the mic over so I can read it a little better. My sound card is quite old. Is there any special sound cards you should use with Cubase, or does it matter what card you have? Different sound cards will have different sound quality. Obviously, some that come with the computer are not ideal or not designed for high quality recording. But something like Steinberg has a whole bunch, a range of audio interfaces, from like a UR12 with one mic pre and one line level input. You can check the prices on that. That's very reasonable. Or probably our most popular interface is like a UR22 Mark II, and that has two mic pre's at 192K MIDI, balanced inputs and outputs, and USB based, and works with everything. So that will, compared to the built-in audio interface, something that's designed for pro audio will make a big difference in the quality of your recordings. So, you could check out something like the Steinberg UR series would be a great place to start off with. I wish my first audio interface was that good and that inexpensive way back when. So a lot of great choices available in the market. So definitely, it's not much money to drastically improve the audio quality and the experience. Okay, so a question on Media Bay and tagging files and putting tags. I believe it's on a Rex2 file. So a lot of times the Media Bay can add tags to files, and some of the tags, and there's unfortunately not a universal standard as to what metadata is read by different programs, but there is a good amount. There's a good amount of space for metadata within the files. Now, Rex2 isn't a standard wave or broadcast wave file, so you're going to be limited to what could be tagged, I think, by default in a Rex2 file versus like a standard wave or broadcast wave file. So the Rex2 is really going to be very much used, just for, like we could import the Rex files directly into Cubase, obviously, and other programs. But if you're looking to work with metadata, I would, use a wave file. Will get you a lot further. And I think the problem is going to be the Rex2 file format, I believe. All right, looking through some other questions here. Thanks for all the great questions, people. Okay, we'll get to audio warp here in just a second. I'll go through this and make sure I'm not missing anything else, and then we'll get into the audio warp. So I appreciate your patience. Okay, so we have just gone through some of the questions. Thanks for your patience. Okay, let's touch on some of the warping. We had a couple questions on this. So the first question we'll start off with tempo signature track question. Is it possible to transfer samples from Media Bay in musical mode into a track with tempo, with a tempo signature track that changes over time? So the signature track is not going to really be a factor in this because it's going to be kind of the tempo. So if you switch to 2/4, often it's not going to make your 4/4 beat kind of automatically play appropriately. So but the tempo track definitely. So let's talk a little bit about this. So let's say if I want to do a new project here. And let's go to my media bay. I'll just find some drum loops. All right, so let's say I throw this drum loop in here and we have it in our timeline. All right, so now sometimes when you drag loops in and they can be tagged, they can be placed into musical mode. Now, a lot of times when you look at the drum loop itself, or when you look at the name of the loop, what you could do is actually just kind of, let's make it a little more pretty. So here it's Fast Rock 170. So the 170 probably indicates the tempo. So, if you select the file, you can see on the info line here. And if you don't see this, you could, again, kind of right click and you could make sure that musical mode is turned on and you could change it so that it, kind of, if you go to the setup page, you could change the order. So if you want that to be more over to the left or to the right, we're able to do that. So we have it set to musical mode. So let's say if I come here, now a lot of times you may have loops that aren't really locked in with the musical mode. So if I turn on my metronome here, there's no correlation. So what we want to do is we want to tell this to be in musical mode. And then at that point, it's going to be just kind of like, just kind of automatically, I'll find some little lesson, more interesting drum loop here. So say I'll drop this loop in here. Okay. So now, since it's in musical mode, it's going to kind of play back whatever tempo that I have. So I'm going to just copy this a bunch of times here. And we could also kind of see that it's in musical mode when you see this little icon in the upper right-hand corner there. So now we'll take this and we'll drag it over. And I'm going to open up just a tempo track underneath. So right now, we'll just add our tempo track. And we want to make sure that our tempo track is turned on. Okay, so now I'm just going to draw in some tempo changes here over time. So now I could just kind of enter in some tempo changes here. And let's do a retard. So now as I do this, this loop will automatically kind of follow that particular tempo. So it's going to be kind of like a tempo slave, if you will. So you could, again, just kind of select it. And there's different types of algorithms too that you could use. So, and while we're here, we had a question about different curve types. Like one thing that a lot of people don't know, and while it doesn't have every type of curve type, if you wanted to draw in automation, there are some really handy tools that a lot of people miss when you come here. So if you wanted to select, you have not only just straight line tools, but if you want to draw in sine waves, we could do that. And I know it's not as flexible with adjusting, the shape of the S's, but I haven't really heard much of a difference sonically between those. So if you wanted to draw in different types, and if you hold down different modifier keys, you can just simply kind of come here and have different shapes. So if you want to have sine wave, square wave, parabola to draw in and adjust the arch of the curve, you could do stuff like that quite easily. So, all right, now we had some other questions on some audio warping as well. So let's take a look at that. So, person asked them to be very patient with that. Okay. Okay. So we covered a little bit with musical mode right there. And then he also asked combined with the time warp tools. He's had some issues where he had to use musical mode clips, had to use the time warp tool later in the project to use tempo detection, has then messed up all my earlier edits. Are there any basic do's and don'ts you could give us to avoid clips getting messed up? Audio gets out of sync with MIDI is using time warp tool, seems to turn off musical mode on tracks. All right, the one thing to be aware of, and I'll just put my mic back in the clip here. Sorry about that. The one thing that I could suggest is, like, when you're doing a lot of this, it could be very dynamic with what you're doing to the audio file. So if we go into, let's say, the sample editor here, I'll just blow it up so you can see it a little better. Once you get into the audio warp, and then especially if you get into free warp stuff where you can say, okay, I need this here, I need that event to be here. So, this is all kind of dynamically changing the files as you do it. The one thing that I could suggest is to choose to flatten the files. And then at that point, it's going to treat it like a normal audio file. So if you're doing other types of edits with it, once you've done your processing here, you could flatten it, and then you could go through the offline process history, like in Cubase Pro 9 level or Innuendo, and then choose to kind of undo the flattening to have the original audio file intact. So try to flatten the files. I know sometimes it may be a commitment, but I believe it shows up in the offline process history. Once you do that, I'll go ahead and check just to make sure. So say I've adjusted that file in the sample editor, and now I we'll choose to flatten that file. So now let me just, it doesn't show up there. So try experimenting, like flattening the file. I mean, you could duplicate it, obviously, or if you wanted to, and you still have your undo history directly there as well. So even though it has been flattened, you could still undo it. So before kind of doing more tempo matching, if you're doing tempo detection, try flattening the file, and I think that will work and kind of gives it a better area, kind of a better ballpark to work from within. All right, so let's go to some of our questions. Thanks again for everyone's great questions. Just kind of go through them. And if you have a question that you asked earlier and I've forgotten it, I just kind of cycle through it in a big linear list. And you're like, why won't he answer my question? Just please feel free to kind of ask it again. You could just kind of ask it in the comments field. All right, so let's take a look at, we had a question on some tips on kind of working with video, and I say in our comment, and that's what Nuendo does, and a lot of times some of the stuff we'll do could be very similar, but there's some great little tips and tricks. So let's say I wanted to import a video file here. I think I have one I could use. Just search for a video file. Okay, I think this project has a video file. Very cool songs with this video. All right, so once you have a video track in your project, one of the things that can often make sense is you hit F8 and this could pull up your video timeline. So as you kind of navigate here within the video, you could do this, and you could actually, as you zoom in, and for the video track, sometimes if you have it down here, something that could be helpful is to add a ruler track. You may not, and then here you could actually set this to frames. So you could say, okay, set this to time code. So you get kind of a decent idea of exactly where you are time code wise. It's right above the video, and you could actually kind of zoom in and out just like you do at the top here based on that time display. So let's say here I have a video edit and I wanted a particular tempo to start right here as kind of an endpoint. One of the tools that we have is a time warp tool. And this allows you to kind of move the time based on the event. So let's say I'm here. Let's say I'm playing this and I need a tempo change to occur. Let me just mute this event, this audio track. So when you imported the video, it automatically put the audio within it. So we're watching our video. And let's say to right there, I need video, my tempo to occur. So again, we switch to our time warp tool and we can say, okay, I need measure 19 to start. We'll say measure to start right here. And I need 4 bars to go directly to that point. And as you do this, what it's doing is we can say we need to fit this number of bars into that amount of space, and it's putting in your tempo changes for you. So you could actually align kind of the grid to visually what's going on and say, okay, this bar starts right here at that time code position. This bar starts right there. So that way you could say, okay, I need an even 4 measures of music to fit between these two visual cues, and you have a tempo reference where the time or the tempo value is fluctuating so that you can have an even number of bars. So you could do that just again by going to the time warp tool and just adjusting based on visually what's going on. So that's a great tip that a lot of film people use for kind of, I need 8 bars of music to fit into this scene. And, instead of doing all sorts of outrageous, pulling out calculators kind of stuff to make it work. So. All right, go through some of your questions. All right, just reading through some. And again, if I missed a question that you entered in the comments field, please feel free to enter it again. It's a great project with Charlie Chaplin film from The Great Dictator. So. Okay, so we had a question on replacing drum sounds. So I see someone indicate my mic has a buzzing sound. Is it still buzzing? If you guys could let me know. If I turn on, it'll kind of create a feedback loop if I turn on. So let me know if my mic is still buzzing. Okay, I'm just going to open up one other project here. So a question on replacing different drum sounds. So let me just... Okay, so let's say if we have a file here. And we wanted to replace some of the drum sounds on it. Just hide my input channels there. So here I have a drum kit loaded up with different samples. And all I had to do is really, I could just double click here and go to my kick. And at that point, go to my hit points like we were doing earlier. And we could adjust the threshold. And then we have this thing called create MIDI notes. And I could create MIDI notes and place it with the original dynamics and put it directly on the first selected track, or I could create a new track and hit OK. And now you could just do your drum replacement just that easily with that. So once again, if you go to sample editor and go to hit points, be able to adjust the threshold, let's say for your kick. And then once you have kind of the hit points set, at that point, create MIDI notes. All right, so we have a question about difference between preference, presets, and profile manager. So with the preference, the preferences are going to be just for the preferences, but the profile will include all of the preferences and key commands and, you know, user definable presets. So the presets will just, the preference presets will just save the preferences. But if you wanted to kind of save all of like how you have your Cubase set up, you could go to the profile manager and then just simply save that, and that would contain your preferences plus presets and key commands and macros and kind of the whole gamut. So the preference presets came first, and then people were like, oh, if I could have one file that would do that, that would be great. And so that's what Steinberg did with the profile manager. So we go through some more questions. All right, I'm going to just listen to sound here real quick. Okay. So I see you were having some buzzing issues. So I'll go ahead and just kind of get through a couple questions, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. All right. So I see a question. How do we get the samples to follow the key signature? And again, you could just simply make sure, just like we did earlier with musical mode, that you have the root key set here for the particular files. And then you could actually have it go into, and if the sample has that metadata built in, it could automatically follow the key signature right there. All right, we'll do one or two more questions and then we'll wrap up. We have a question: is Cubase better than FL Studio? The answer is yes. All right. Well, we're having some audio buzzes, but we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up there. We got much farther than we have in previous Google Hangouts. I'd like to thank everyone for their questions. And if you want to send your questions in advance, you can send them to ClubCubase at Steinberg.net. If you like the video, please feel free to subscribe to the Cubase channel. I hope everyone learned some tips and tricks, and we'll see you next time. Talk to you later.